All right, I think we're ready. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the House Appropriations Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. I'm Chair Delegate Bridges, along with my Vice Chair, Delegate Julius Ivey, as well as members Delegate McComas and Delegate Stonko. We'll also have Delegate Acevero joining us shortly, and I'm excited to have next to us the Appropriations Chair as well, Chairman Barnes. So first, we are going to hear from Judiciary, and we'll get an analysis on Judiciary from Mr. Jacob Polakov, and then we'll bring up our agency representatives. So, Mr. Polakov.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, as I remember how a microphone works. The Judiciary, as we all know, is the branch of state government tasked with adjudicating legal disputes and interpreting and applying the laws of the state. While the Judiciary's budget is submitted as part of the governor's budget, it is developed without executive branch oversight. We'll see in the middle of page 1 that the fiscal 24 budget increases by $34 million, or about 4.7% to $759 million. On page 2, we'll find a couple of key observations, including notes on the fiscal 2022 court performance measures report, the progression of Maryland electronic courts, which we'll be calling MDEC, MDEC's rollout, and some updates on judiciary programs. Notably, in each of those, the fiscal 2022 court performance measures report was submitted to the budget committees in December of 2022, which highlighted a number of trends and various types of cases heard by trial courts throughout the state. MDEC rolled out in Prince George's County in October of 2022. This means that 23 of the 24 circuit courts have now completed their MDEC integration. The last court to implement MDEC is Baltimore City, which is currently scheduled to complete the implementation process sometime in fiscal 2024. We can then look to page 3, where we can see that the judiciary is composed of 4 courts and 5 other programs that support the administrative, personnel, technological, and regulatory functions of the judicial branch of state government. The courts consist of the Supreme Court of Maryland, the Appellate Court of Maryland, the Circuit Courts, and the District Court. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Maryland is the administrative head of the state's judicial system. The Chief Justice appoints the state court administrator as head of the administrative office of the courts, AOC, to carry out administrative duties, including data analysis, personnel management, education, and training for judicial personnel. Other units are also included under the administrative and budgetary purview of the judiciary, including the Rules Committee, the Commission on Judicial Disabilities, and the Maryland State Board of Law Examiners. Additionally, the Thurgood Marshall State Law Library serves the legal information needs of the state. The Judicial Information Systems manages information systems maintenance and information technology development for the judiciary. Our first part of the performance analysis section is to note that court case clearance rates remain above the time standard. In December 2022, as previously mentioned, the judiciary submitted its annual report on court performance measures. The report used data from 2019 to compare to 2022, owing to the judiciary's inability to submit the report in calendar 2021, as the judiciary asserted that the report could not be completed due to the suspension of time standards in the courts during the COVID-19 pandemic. This report expounded on the fact that the judiciary faced a number of challenges in hearing cases during the pandemic and that the courts continued to contend with backlogs. One notable example of this is that the average case processing time increased in fiscal 2022 in all 9 case categories for which circuit court data was submitted. For example, foreclosure cases had an average case time of 636 days in fiscal 2022, which is more than double the 314 days those cases took in fiscal 2019. Additionally, in fiscal 2022, we'll note that 4 of the 9 types of tracked cases had average case times above the time standard established for that particular type of case. In fiscal 2019, only 2 types of cases were above the time standard. Exhibit 1, found on page 4, shows a breakdown of average case processing times as compared to the time standard established for that case type. The bars on the left are the 2019 overall average case time. The bars on the right are the 2022 average case time. And the small diamonds seen throughout the chart are the time standard in days from the judiciary. In fiscal 2022, the judiciary tracked the number of cases that surpassed the prescribed time standard, along with whether the reason for the case running over the time standard related to the COVID-19 emergency or not. Criminal cases experienced the most cases over standard due to COVID-19 in fiscal 2022. Additionally, the data shows that few cases went over the time standard in the areas of limited divorce, juvenile delinquency, child in need of assistance, which is abbreviated as CINA, both CINA shelter and CINA non-shelter in this case. Data on the number of cases over standard and the number of over standard cases specifically due to COVID-19 can be found in Exhibit 2, which is on page 5. The judiciary's case time standards additionally allow for the suspension of case time if certain events occur that halt the court's ability to advance the case forward. The suspension data submitted as part of the Court Performance Measures Report showed that across the 9 types of cases tracked by the judiciary, 8 categories had at least one suspension in fiscal 2022, and foreclosures had the highest rate of cases suspended at 32%. We'll find data on suspensions across all of the tracked case types in Exhibit 3, which can be found at the top of page 6. Below that, we'll find that the judiciary should comment on what the expected timeline is for average case processing times to return to 2019 levels and what is being done operationally to accomplish this timeline goal. Additionally, the Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting the submission of the report on court performance measures for fiscal 2023. Going to page 7 of this analysis, we'll find information on the help centers, which continue to support Marylanders' legal needs. In recent years, legal assistance programs from the judiciary and pro bono legal service providers have continued to expand their offerings to individuals involved in non-criminal cases in the state. The judiciary has established and continues to grow several programs designed to assist litigants in court matters. These programs provide attorneys for short duration, limited representation, or for facilitating effective self-representation. These services, rather than full representation, allow legal aid to be provided to a higher number of litigants. This method of delivering legal aid allows for broader offerings of legal assistance and improves access to justice. As of fiscal 2022, the most recent year with data available, the judiciary offered 3 separate types of help centers to deliver legal aid to litigants. The first is the Maryland Court Help Center, which is a remote call and contact center providing assistance via phone, live chat, or email, and that's staffed by the Maryland Center for Legal Assistance. The second are family law help centers. These are walk-in centers providing support to litigants in family law cases across the state. These centers are supported via grants from the AOC, the Administrative Office of the Courts. And then we have district court help centers. The judiciary contracts with the Maryland Center for Legal Assistance to staff these walk-in centers. During the pandemic, the Maryland Court Help Center was able to operate at full capacity during the pandemic due to its remote operation. Usage of the Maryland Court Help Center has increased in every fiscal year since 2016. As the service has become more popular, it has increased from providing support 31,181 times in fiscal 2016 to almost 114,000 times in fiscal 2022. The family law and district court centers, being walk-in centers, were impacted by COVID-19 closures in fiscal 2020 through 2022. Usage of the district court centers rebounded in fiscal 2022, the year in which judiciary returned to normal operations following the pandemic, surpassing usage levels from fiscal 2019. Information on the total number of Marylanders served by these programs each year can be found in Exhibit 4 at the top of page 8. We can then jump into an overview of fiscal 2024 agency spending for the judiciary. The budget provides funding for 10 programs. These programs include the trial courts, both district and circuit courts, the appellate courts, which are the Appellate Court of Maryland and the Supreme Court of Maryland, the Administrative Office of the Courts, and various other support functions. Exhibit 5 at the top of page 9 shows a fuller breakdown of the agency's budget. The trial courts occupy 66% of the budget at $503 million. The Administrative Office of the Courts is budgeted at $120 million, or about 16% of the allowance for fiscal 2024. On page 10, we have Exhibit 6, which shows the judiciary's budget request increasing by $34 million, or 4.7%. The growth is driven by statutory salary increases for judges, merit increases for other staff, and funding for new positions. Most notably, we have the annualization of the November 2022 4.5% cost of living adjustment, which came out to about $4.91 million. We have funding for 15 and a quarter new positions. We have funding for the Courthouse e-Readiness Project, which helps to prepare for the Maryland Electronic Courts rollout. We have an increase in the per diem for jury service from $15 per day to $30 per day, as per Chapter 546 of 2022. And then one noticeable removal from this budget, we do have removal of funding for access to counsel and eviction services, which is shifting in the fiscal 2024 budget to the allowance for the Office of the Attorney General. And there will be further discussion there in that analysis. Just a couple of notes. The 2021 Judicial Compensation Commission recommendation recommended that judicial compensation increase by $10,000 per year from fiscal 2023 to 2026. This year's budget reflects the continued implementation of these judicial compensation increases. And as previously mentioned, the increase in state per diem paid to jurors from $15 per day to $30 per day for the first 5 days of jury service. This change applies to any individual required to be in attendance at or in proximity to a circuit court for a county for jury service for the first 5 days of that service. The per diem of $50 per day given after the first 5 days is not altered. The impact, as previously discussed, is about $4.3 million in fiscal 2024. Major IT project costs are projected to be approximately $22.7 million in fiscal 2024. This represents an estimated increase of $5 million from fiscal 2023 estimated spending on these projects. This increase is driven by increased costs for the rollout of Maryland Electronic Courts, along with the associated Courthouse e-Readiness Project, which is designed to ensure that electrical and network infrastructure in courthouses will be able to support MDEC along with other planned major IT projects. At the bottom half of page 12, we have information on personnel data, which shows that the judiciary is gaining 15 and a quarter new positions this year. The new positions in fiscal 2024's allowance include 1 circuit court judge and 1 magistrate for Baltimore County, along with support staff. This request for new judges has been made after the submission of the judiciary's annual report on the need for judgeships. The report for fiscal 2024 certified a need for 7 judgeships, but the judiciary is only requesting 1 judge position and 1 magistrate position in light of its recognition of budgetary considerations and space constraints within the courthouses where additional need was certified. The Department of Legislative Services does recommend the adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on judgeship needs for fiscal 2025. The district courts will also gain a problem-solving courts case manager along with clerks as part of this request for new positions, and remaining requests for new positions support the Judicial College, the Rules Committee, the Thurgood Marshall State Law Library, and Judicial Disabilities. The judiciary is currently experiencing a comparatively high vacancy rate. That was 7.34% as of the end of December 2022. And the judiciary should comment on what is being done to bring the vacancy rate down to the budgeted turnover rate. On page 14, we have the start of a discussion of a couple of different issues. The first is, as previously mentioned, the judiciary's programs increase access to justice resources. The first of these is the Appointed Attorney Program, which was created by the General Assembly in 2014 to ensure state compliance with the decision issued by the Supreme Court of Maryland in DeWolf v. Richmond. Under the Appointed Attorney Program, the judiciary supplies attorneys to represent indigent defendants at initial appearances before district court commissioners. These attorneys are private attorneys who are compensated by the state at a rate of $60 per hour. In each year since the program's inception, the budget committees have required the judiciary to report on the cost of the program. The data shows that the program stayed within its appropriation overall in fiscal 2022, but that certain counties exceeded their allocation of funds while others still had funding left over. Data regarding the cost of the appointed attorney program by county can be found in Exhibit 7 on the bottom half of page 14. In fiscal 2022, $8.25 million of the Judiciary's general fund appropriation was restricted for the purpose of appointing attorneys for the purpose of required representation at initial appearances before district court commissioners. However, in fiscal 2022, several jurisdictions did exceed the amount of funding allocated for them in this program. In order for the state to ensure that all indigent defendants have access to counsel at their initial appearances before district court commissioners, it is critical that this program have the monetary resources available to provide counsel. Additionally, the judiciary submitted a report last year on the costs of the appointed attorney program as requested by the 2022 Joint Chairman's Report. However, the report also requested statistics on the utilization of the program, which were not provided in great detail in the report. Therefore, DLS recommends adopting budget bill language restricting $8.25 million of general funds to be used for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. DLS also recommends adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on the costs and utilization of the appointed attorney program, including the results of initial appearances before district court commissioners when attorneys were appointed to represent indigent defendants as part of the appointed attorney program. Next, at the bottom of page 15, we have a little more on the rollout of MDEC in Baltimore City, which, as previously mentioned, is the last jurisdiction of 24 which needs to implement the MDEC program. The rollout of MDEC in Baltimore City is more complex than in other jurisdictions for a number of reasons, including different software that has previously been used to support court functions, along with challenges presented by physical infrastructure in the 7 court locations. The Baltimore City Circuit Court and District Court currently utilize 6 different systems for various court functions. This represents a significant difference from other jurisdictions, which have each only had one system which needed to be converted to MDEC. 3 of the systems used by Baltimore City courts are managed by external vendors, and these vendors will need to work with the judiciary to convert their systems over to MDEC. Additionally, aging building infrastructure has presented challenges in ensuring that the computer networks are ready to support the technological needs of MDEC. Network and electrical wiring, along with reliable wireless access, all present potential challenges to MDEC implementation, and they're currently being evaluated. As previously mentioned, MDEC is projected to go online in Baltimore City during fiscal 2024. The estimated remaining cost of the rollout of MDEC in Baltimore City as of December 2022 is displayed in Exhibit 8, found in the middle of page 16. While these costs are accounted for in the fiscal 2024 allowance, the operational challenges of implementing MDEC in Baltimore City still present significant issues. Therefore, the Department of Legislative Services recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that the judiciary submit quarterly reports on the status of the implementation of MDEC in Baltimore City. Next, we have a discussion of projected shortfall in the Circuit Court Real Property Records Improvement Fund. That fund is used for a variety of purposes, including major IT projects in the judiciary, Circuit Court office operations, and the State Archives MD Land Rec program. The fund receives revenues from surcharge and copy fees, as well as e-filing service fees. Additionally, Chapter 522 of 2022 allowed the judiciary to make a transfer of $12 million to this fund. The fund is currently projected to have a structural shortfall in fiscal 2023 through 2027. Data on the fund's projected balances may be found in Exhibit 9 on page 17 of this analysis. While the fund is not projected to run out of money in the time period covered by the projection, the total fund balance is projected to decline by more than $40 million. This could lead to operational struggles in future years if the fund's revenue sources and amounts are not changed and the same level of spending is maintained. Because these funds are used to support major IT projects, the decrease in the projected fund balance over the next several years represents a potential challenge in funding future major IT projects. DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on the judiciary's major IT projects, including the anticipated costs of major IT projects through fiscal 2028. On page 18, we'll find all of the operating budget recommended actions. These include the adoption of narrative for the appointed attorney program costs and utilization, the judgeship need for fiscal 2025, the judiciary status report on major information technology development projects, and the annual court performance measures report, as well as a recommendation for the adoption of budget bill language restricting funds for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. With that, Mr. Chair, that concludes everything I have for you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jacob. Are there any questions for the analyst? All right, seeing none, we will now go to the agency. We will have Chief Justice Matthew Fader and Chief Judge John Morrissey. If you want to bring anybody else up, please feel free to do so as well. Just make sure you introduce them when they come up to speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're also bringing up the State Court Administrator, Pamela Harris. Thank you, Chair Bridges, Vice Chair Ivey, Chair Barnes, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you, and thank you for your consideration of our budget, and also thanks to Mr. Polikoff for his very thorough and detailed review of the budget. The judiciary has reviewed the recommended actions and concurs with each of them. The judiciary has also submitted written responses to the request for comment. So with that, we're here to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Well, the committee may have some. Let me just start with one. I've realized that, like others in the state, we are always making sure that we have appropriate staffing. And you may not have the answer to this, but as I understand, Baltimore City Circuit Court has a number of positions that are unfilled. I'm not sure of the exact numbers. I believe it was 297, but I believe that 10% of those 297 have gone unfilled. Not sure if you could speak to that or what the plans are to make sure that we have appropriate staffing.
So I do have some familiarity with the with this, and I think you're talking about the clerk's office in particular there. I think that 297 is actually a total number of PINs, not open staff. My understanding is that there were, when I last heard about it a couple of weeks ago, 27 open PINs that were available to be filled right away, and they were in some status of being filled. There were requests going through the our HR department to put out advertisements in order to fill them. There are some other number of those that had previously been available in the past, and due to a study of the utilization of the office, had not been currently available to be filled, but of course, there were 27 positions that hadn't been filled yet that were available, and so that's something that would be looked at once those positions get filled. But there are vacancies, as Mr. Polikoff referenced, there are vacancies that are higher than usual throughout the judiciary and across the judiciary. That's something that we are aiming to try to fill. We're encountering a lot of the same difficulties that employers across the state are encountering. Some of those are worse when you get to the DC suburbs, where you have a lot of entities that are other entities that might be competing with that are fully remote. And so we are also actively engaged in studying our remote work policies and alternative work arrangements in order to see what we can do on the retention and recruitment front there as well. But in Baltimore City, as well as throughout the rest of the state, reducing the vacancy rate is something we are focused on.
Thank you for that. Looks like Delegate Acevedo may have had a question as well.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Chief Justice, to you and your team. Just wanted to follow up on an issue that I think we've been discussing. I think Judge Morrissey might be familiar with it, but around expungement. The legislature is going to be doing a good bit of work around expungement, particularly as it relates to cannabis reform, automatic expungement, et cetera. And I know there was some funds over the years that we used to get the technology to be able to do that. And so I'm just curious as to whether the judiciary is or will be in a place where those expungements would be able to be done so that we're providing relief to people and it's not necessarily a barrier, whether it's for employment or anything else. So just curious as to if you, your team, can provide an update now or in writing later on as to the technology will the judiciary be in a position to be able to allow for expungements pursuant to, the legislation that we will be passing? And if not, what's the timeline for that?
Okay. Thank you. That's a great question, Delegate Acevedo. And if you look at what's occurred in the past couple years, 2 years ago, the legislature, and we worked very closely with you all, and thank you for hearing us on these things as to what we can accomplish and what reasonable timelines are and how we can do this. For Case Search, our publicly facing site that you can look up, your name, or you could look up anything, any case out there that's not otherwise restricted. We removed any district court, what we consider a partial expungement, meaning any marijuana charge from the district court that appeared on Case Search, and we were able to figure out the technology in order to do that through Case Search. Then last year, that was expanded to the circuit court. Any circuit court cases that also have a charge of marijuana, again, a partial expungement, meaning it's not the only charge in the case. There could be other convictions, but that charge would have been removed also from Case Search. So that's actually occurring right now. That does have some unintended consequences where some of the people that are trying to find those marijuana convictions or null processes or not guilties can no longer see that on Case Search anymore. So it makes it more difficult for them to get the full expungement. We have, in anticipating that the new legislation was coming in, we have purchased redaction software that is going to help us with that. There's still astronomical numbers, though, of these convictions, and we have a report that we've already sent down to the legislature on what maybe it was in a fiscal note last year that details how many numbers there are. And so if you remember that from 2014, when we first started, we started in Anne Arundel County, and those are electronic records, right? So we have the actual documents scanned in as PDFs, and that's where the redaction software is going to come in, because it can search through those and determine, green leafy substance and marijuana and those type of, whatever we can teach it to learn whatever names we call marijuana, and assist the clerks with the redaction on that. Any case prior to 2014 that wasn't active as the time that we went live did not get converted to, we didn't scan in every prior case prior to 2014. So those are more of the challenge that we have, and we've worked very closely with the legislature in the past couple of years to try to figure out a solution that we can actually do, and we look forward to doing that again this year.
Just one more question, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. So, and I also know, because there've been a good bit of legislation introduced around the unit rule, and I know the judiciary hasn't opined on the intent of the bill, right? But certainly the mechanisms of doing this, and so hence the reason for my question, because if and when we pass legislation to sort of change the unit rule, will the judiciary be in a position to then be able to do that? Because I know it's not about the intent of the bill, but it's the ability of you all to do that, and that's where I'm curious as to are you all there, or will you be there when that legislation passes?
Well, I think we agree with you 100% that I certainly understand your intent, and that's a policy decision that we would never take a position on. That's inherently within your authority. The challenge is going to be the paper files, because someone is, the questions that we've been going back and forth on is, do we scan any prior file that contained a charge of a controlled dangerous substance? Part of the problem is that prior to 2014, we didn't identify, it was either a controlled dangerous substance, narcotics, or a controlled dangerous substance. So that could include other drugs that are not narcotics that are included in there. So it's not just, we didn't have a code just for marijuana is basically what I'm saying.
Right.
In the paper files, whether we scan those in and then run the redaction software on it, or whether we don't, we've had
multiple hundreds of hours of conversations with our IT department about how we can accomplish this. And I don't think necessarily it's whether we can, it's how long it's going to take us to do it and what the resources are needed to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up with you on that. So whether it's, personnel or whether it's a technology thing, I just want to make sure that there's no reason why we aren't able to do this. So
I can send you the fiscal note from last year that really breaks it out as to, the time that we think it takes and then, how many personnel that involves. And we're actually meeting on the Senate side to discuss the same thing. So
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Any other questions? All right, I can tell these are the softball questions because I know you have Judiciary a little bit later, so this is the easiest you'll have today.
we appreciate
I appreciate
that,
you all
Chair.
being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yep. Until the next time. So that will end the hearing for Judiciary today. We will now go to Workers' Compensation Commission. We'll have the budget analyst, Jason Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Kramer. I'll be presenting the analysis for the Workers' Compensation Commission. The WCC administers the state's workers' compensation law. The chart here on page 1 shows that the Commission's fiscal 2024 allowance increased 5.5% to $22.6 million, which is entirely in special funds. Moving to Exhibit 1 on page 2. Exhibit 1 shows that 61% of the allowance is for personnel, with spending on the Commission's case management system making up 19% of the allowance. Turning to Exhibit 2 on page 3, this shows the areas of change in the Workers' Compensation Commission's allowance. Most of the change is in personnel costs. Costs related to the Comp Hub major IT project grow by $154,000 in the allowance. The project had previously been scheduled for completion in fiscal 2024, but funding is now extended into 2025 with a cost increase of about $3 million total for the project. The project will be finished in 2023, but developers and contractors will be needed for software enhancements and maintenance. The Commission has been unable to recruit replacements capable of the programming and development duties needed for the new system. Moving to the first key observation section on page 5, the Commission's goal is to set 90% of hearings for injured workers within 60 days. The pandemic disrupted hearings and created a backlog of cases. Exhibit 3 here on page 5 shows that only 39% of hearings were set within the 60-day goal in fiscal 2021, but that improved to 68% in fiscal 2022 as the agency worked through its backlog. The Commission states it has cleared the backlog and expects to meet its goal in fiscal 23. Exhibit 4 on page 6 shows the factors that go into calculating the Commission's assessment on the state's insurers and self-insured entities to support operations, as well as the Department of Labor's workplace fraud and occupational safety and health programs. The assessment rate increased by 10% due to a decrease in the payroll base and increases in commission expenses. Page 7, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jason. Do we have any questions for the analyst? Seeing none, thank you again. Definitely appreciate your analysis. Now we'll have the acting chair for Workers' Compensation Commission, Maureen Quinn. And please bring up anyone you want to bring up with you and have them introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon, Chair Bridgers, Vice Chair Ivey. I'm Maureen Quinn. Most of you I've known for probably some decades as wife of Kumar Barve. But I've upgraded my resume this year. I am the acting chair effective January 1st, and our chairman, Carl Allman, husband of former Delegate Sue Allman, retired, and I will serve in this acting role until the governor makes his decision about a permanent chair. And I do have an application in for that position. I want to also introduce the star power that I brought with me today. To my right is our CEO, Mary Ahern, and to my left is Jay Moore, our Director of Fiscal Services, and our CFO, David Jones. Let me I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Oh, and in the first row, trying to hide, is our COO, Teresa Cornish. Let me begin by saying, when you think about our agency, I want you to think about us as a collection of judges, because there are 10 of us. We all are appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. 9 of us take the bench every morning in our 7 courthouses, and we hear workers' compensation cases. And that is the core function that we serve in the state of Maryland. We have approximately 110 employees, and we're not funded by taxpayers, as I think everyone on this committee knows. But last year, when we had almost $600,000 left over after our expenditures for the year, we returned that money to the insurance companies. Much of that money was returned because of unfilled vacancies at the commission. We have a couple of tools that we're using to address what the speaker's agenda is, to rebuild state government. The first thing we've done is to try and bring some of our really happy, satisfied employees onto these interview panels who can help address some of the salary issues that inevitably come up. Because what a lot of people don't really realize is the savings for health insurance and the savings for parking and other things that people in the private sector have to pay for that either you don't have to pay for as a state employee or you pay a lot less. The other thing, the other important component here is you have to take care of the talent that you have. And I think Teresa Cornish, our COO, is a perfect example of that. We're bringing her to Annapolis now because we see a future for her. She's a COO now. Maybe she'll be a CEO when our CEO retires. So we like to think of transition planning as being an important part of rebuilding state government. So I want to thank our analyst, Jason Kramer, for his professionalism and his analysis that he's provided throughout the years. I look forward to getting to know you, Jason. And the agency concurs with the recommended action to concur with the governor's allowance. So being respectful of the committee's time, I will open this up to questions.
Thank you very much. And I see we already have one from Delegate Acevedo.
Why am I not surprised?
No question. Just to welcome you. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you. Good to see you as well.
Yeah. I'll see you back in the county.
Oh, right. And I also just finished up 20 years as a commissioner. So I really hope that that institutional knowledge will be an asset to this agency that I really deeply care about.
Absolutely. Excited about your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I'll just say thank you as well, especially for, one of the things that I try to talk about here are the vacancies and, what agencies are doing to bring those vacancies down. And you started off talking about your vacancies and the things that you're doing already. So it's definitely appreciated. So with that, don't think that we have any questions or any other questions. Well, actually, Delegate Acevedo didn't ask a question, so we have no questions. It doesn't count
against him.
So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for your leadership.
Definitely appreciate you. Right. That will end the hearing for the Workers' Compensation Commission, and we'll go right into the subsequent injury fund. And we'll have Mr. Jason Kramer give us the analysis again.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. The subsequent injury fund compensates injured workers whose pre-existing injuries are substantially worsened by a current injury. The fund receives special funds from a 6.5% assessment on awards against employers or insurers for permanent disability or death, as well as amounts payable by employers or insurers under settlement agreements. As you can see here on page 1, the fiscal 2024 budget increases by just under 5% to $2.9 million. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows the agency's fiscal 2024 allowance. As you can see, it's nearly entirely driven by personnel as well as a small amount for contractual services. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows the changes in the fiscal 2024 allowance compared to the fiscal 2023 working appropriation. The increase is driven primarily by personnel costs, specifically in health insurance and the annualization of the November 2022 cost of living adjustment. On page 5, the first key observation I'll discuss, Exhibit 3, shows the agency's fund assessment revenue. The fund is at is based on a 6.5% assessment on workers' compensation awards. It was reduced to 5.5% for fiscal 2021 only. As you can see, the dip there in the graph on page 5. The return to the 6.5% assessment rate in fiscal 2022 resulted in revenues of just under $28 million, a $5 million increase over the prior year. Exhibit 4 on page 6, that assessment revenue offset by expenses and payouts to claimants leads to the fund balance, which closed at $114 million in fiscal 2022. The growth, despite the lower assessment rate in 2021, grew by 1.4%, and then returned to a more typical growth rate of about 5.5% in fiscal 2022. The agency's most recent actuarial study, issued in January of last year, found that the subsequent injury fund had liabilities between $315 million and $548 million, depending on different assumptions about mortality and discount rates. DLS is asking the agency to comment on the appropriateness of its assessment rate and its future plans for actuarial studies. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none, we will move on to Mr. Edgar Dodd, Director of the Subsequent Injury Fund. Please bring up anyone you would like and make sure you just introduce them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with you this afternoon. My name is Edgar Dodd. I am the Director of the Subsequent Injury Fund, and with me today is Mrs. Rose Hunt. She's our Fiscal Services Administrator. We'd like to thank Mr. Kramer for his excellent analysis. The comments he wanted me to make specifically about the actuary study, we were pleased that the actuary agreed maintaining the current 6.5% assessment rate for the foreseeable future. We think we are positioned well to serve the injured workers in Maryland that we send benefits to on a biweekly basis. We also concur with the actuary's recommendation that we change our current 5 to 6 year cycle of actuary studies to 4 years. And during that time, of course, we will continue to monitor closely our revenues versus our expenditures. So with that, I respectfully request a positive vote on the recommended allocation for FY 2024, and we'll take any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Let me just ask one question. The study said that there's a risk for an increase in the assessment rate in the next 10 years. And is that part of the reason for shortening the length of the study?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The last 3 studies, were out of an abundance of caution. They continue to emphasize the importance for us to monitor our balance, which we have done. And as Mr. Kramer pointed out, our balance continues to grow over the past 10 years, and we're pleased with that, and we have projected growth for this fiscal year.
Got it. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Definitely appreciate it. That was a quick hearing on your budget.
We appreciate that.
Yep, we appreciate you as well. Thank you very much. That will end the hearing for the Subsequent Injury Fund. We'll next move on to the State Board of Elections, and we'll have the analysis by Mr. Ryan Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll begin by just simply stating that the fiscal 2024 budget would decrease funding for the State Board of Elections by $9.3 million or 16.8% to $46.2 million. Moving on to Exhibit 1 on page 4, we can look at voter participation in the 2018 and 2022 election cycles. And we can see that while primary participation increased by about 3 percentage points, participation in the general election fell by about 10 percentage points. Additionally, looking at Exhibit 2 on page 5, we can look at the voter behavior for those same elections, and we can see very clearly that mail-in voting is much more popular now than it was previously, growing by 350%. And the agency should comment on how these changes in voter behavior, particularly mail-in voting, will impact its budgeting and planning for future elections. Additionally, there was redistricting involved in those elections as well, as it had to be pushed back, as the primary itself was pushed back due to delays. Altogether, the events condensed the time frame for implementing the new congressional and legislative districts and ensuring voters received updated registration cards and information on the new polling locations. There were around 5,000 voter addresses initially distributed information for incorrect districts and had to be given new cards. However, it is not unexpected for some proportion of voters to be incorrectly identified initially during the complicated process of redistricting. Moving on to page 6 at the top, there is one proposed deficiency for the State Board of Elections, which would provide $32,000 in general funds to replace a vehicle. Looking at Exhibit 3 on that same page, for the overview of agency spending, we can see that the majority of their funds go towards election operation, with personnel, MD voters, AIMS, poll book project, IT contracts, and administration making up the rest of their allocations. Moving along to Exhibit 4 on page 7, which continues on page 8, we can again see that their budget decreases by $9.3 million. This is largely due to the mandated funding of the Fair Campaign Financing Fund per Chapter 733 of 2021 not being required this year, as well as decreases in funding for the poll book project due to reimbursable funds, which will be discussed later in this analysis. Additionally, on page 9, we highlight that we are increasing funding for new voting equipment for the existing voting system contract by $1.4 million, and the agency should discuss the reason why additional equipment is required. Moving on to personnel on page 10, they have one vacant position, and it's been vacant shortly. Additionally, there are 4 new positions, 2 computer network specialists, and 1 campaign finance administrator and 1 campaign finance program manager. Moving on to page 11 for a discussion of the poll book project. The poll book project was originally scheduled to be used in the 2022 election cycle, but was rescheduled for use in the 2024 election cycle instead. Ultimately, this decision was driven by a mixture of both procurement and implementation delays affecting the project. Specifically, factors included underestimating the time required to draft the request for proposals, a general lack of staff availability due to pandemic-related pressures, and time required to ensure final reliability and staff familiarity with the new system. In the fiscal 2024 allowance, an additional $1.2 million is being provided for software testing and licensing, while funding for the personnel project would be decreased by $1 million. And funding for hardware purchases is being decreased by $3.3 million. However, this overstates the decrease, as funds totaling $2.6 million are found in DeWitt's major IT project fund, which will be transferred to the State Board of Elections as reimbursable funds later in the year. For the 2022 session, significant progress has been made on the poll book project, and it's been consistent, indicating significant improvement from the previous year. In March 2023, the State Board of Elections plans to begin systems integration testing and then conduct a mock election as the final test before implementation. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative, requesting continued submission of quarterly reports on the progress of and spending on the poll book project through its completion. On page 12, there's issue 2, which are 2 new major information technology development projects beginning in fiscal 2024. A new voting system solution, as well as the campaign reporting information system. Given the lack of information on either project, DLS recommends adopting committee narrative, requesting the State Board of Elections to provide information on the scope and schedule of the 2 new projects. The final pages provide the exact wording of the recommended narratives, as well as appendices. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the analyst? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much for your analysis. We will now bring up from the State Board of Elections, State Administrator Linda Lamone. And please, whoever you bring up, just make sure you introduce them as well. Thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Congratulations on your election or re-election, as the case may be. It's nice to see everyone. To my right, I have Nikki Charleston. She's the deputy administrator. And to my left is Shelley Holland, who does everything money-wise at the State Board of Elections. So if you have any questions about money, she's the one. And also, I want to thank them and thank Ryan for a great job. He's new to us this year. Our budget is not exactly like everyone else's. So if I may, I'd also like to thank the staff at the State Board and the local boards for a very successful election last year and for serving our voters well. If you talk to your local election office, give them a kudo because they all worked really, really hard. They did a good job. So thank you. Our focus for 2024 is getting the new electronic poll book project done, ready to go. Our old electronic poll books we started using, I think, back in 2006, and as you would imagine, they're starting to get a little tired, and we can't get any more of them anyway. We submitted a written request to everything, but I'll just touch briefly on a couple of things that Ryan raised. The changes in voter behavior from in-person voting to mail-in voting. What impact is that going to have? Well, more people to manage it and money, pay them, and to pay for the additional costs for additional mail-in ballots and the stamps and the envelopes and all that stuff. So it is what it is. Our voters want to vote. We're happy that they're doing it. And then he raised an issue about money for increased equipment. We really didn't buy or lease any new equipment for this past election. We got it for the election before that. And this is money in the budget is to cover the lease payment that's due for the last option. So that's all that is. And then DLS wants us to continue to submit reports on our major projects. And we, of course, are more than willing to do that. So with that, we concur in the agency's recommendations, and we'll be happy to answer any and all questions you all have.
Thank you very much. I do have a few questions that I wanted to ask, and you started talking about the poll book project, so let me just begin with that. Just looking at the budget and even with the new hires of those two regular positions, are those positions the network specialist, and I don't see the other one, but are they related to the poll book project, or is that something totally different?
Hello, my name is Shelley Holland with the State Board of Election in the Budget Office and Finance. So the two new pins for the network specialists, they are our regional managers, and they'll be assisting the local boards in all their IT needs and assisting them with, they will be helping out with the poll book project and testing for that.
Got it. So in terms of the project, the hardware, the purchase of the hardware is decreasing by $3.3 million. Is that correct?
Well, the hardware is decreasing, yes. A part is the contract. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's already been purchased then.
Yes, we've ordered it. We've ordered it through another procurement, and we are in the process of waiting for delivery.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let me ask a slightly different question. Going back to the pie chart that's on page 6, Exhibit 3, it says the agency election management system will have a budget of approximately $8 million. Last year, I thought we finished developing and implementing a new AEMS system and updated the system. So is that related to the cost, or is this something different? What is the $8 million going towards?
What is that? So what happened with AEMS, that was included in our MD voters contract, so we have separated them out. So AEMS will have their own budget, and their own line item, and empty voters would have theirs. It's for maintenance, yes. Yes.
This is for
Maintenance.
the maintenance of
Yes.
the system. Okay. All right. Okay. I may have some other questions around that, but I think that answered sort of what I was asking about. Delegate McComas.
I'm new to this, so please pardon the dumb question, but what exactly does a poll book do? And I shouldn't be asking this, but anyway.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Nikki Charlson, State Board of Elections. The electronic poll book is the tablet-like devices that the poll workers use to check in voters. So when you go and vote in person, that device that you're seeing the back end, they're using that to check you in. It's also used for same-day registration during early voting and on election day, and same-day address change during early voting. So it replaces the paper books that we used to have a long time ago. It's just a much more efficient way of basically checking in voters.
Does it analyze my signature? Because, I usually, they give me a little thing and then I sign it.
Right. It prints the little piece of paper that you sign, but it doesn't capture that. That piece of paper that you sign follows you to the voting unit where you scan in your ballot. So it's just tracking to that unit, but it does not track the signature in the poll books.
Then the other question I have is how long have you been using the poll books that you've been using that you need new poll books?
So we first implemented these in 2006.
Okay. So basically they're kind of old.
They are
or as they say, long in the tooth.
They are.
Okay. Now the other quick question, and I might divert. I divert a little bit. It seems to me if we are increasing mail-in voting, does that kind of indicate maybe we don't have to have that many days for early voting? Because that's a tremendous burden on county folks staffing the different early voting centers.
Well, that's completely a policy decision, Delegate, for you and your colleagues as to how many days we should have. There's a bill in, at least one, to reduce the number of days by a member of the Ways and Means Committee.
Well, are you getting pulled in to advise as far as the statistics that you keep and stuff as to what the trends are?
Yeah, we have provided that. We have on our webpage, we just posted a very extensive report from the last election, and there's one for prior elections. And you can see the trends. I think Nikki put a chart in there of when early voting is, what days people like, and what the participation is.
Okay. I digress. One more question. I have been getting emails from certain folks that they're thinking that there's some problems with our system and everything. And I talked to one of my constituents who's into computers, and he felt that our system was one of the best around. So I just kind of, are you getting hassled by folks that think that we have a bad system and it allows gremlins to get in there and do things?
Well, I think there probably are some people that think that, but they're not right. Want to elaborate?
Right, so I'm sure we're getting the same kind of inquiries that you are, and we spend the time to talk to them, refer them to our website where we have a page that talks about how we secure our systems. And it's an education process, and appreciate you and the rest of you, if you're getting them too, is spending the time to talk to them or send them to either our office or your local election office so they can learn about how the process.
They've been hanging out at our election office for a long
Yes,
time.
I know that some of them are active participants and active attendees at local board meetings. I think it's understanding that the voting system is not connected to the internet. Understanding that we follow best practices for information systems and how we protect our data, that we have good partnerships with our federal and local and state partners so that we can protect these systems. It's not a one-sentence answer, which is what makes it hard, but yeah, we believe that we have all the protective measures in place to be able to protect our systems and to monitor our systems and then respond if something happens to them.
And real quick follow-up. Your system, our Maryland's computer system, or not computer, but election system gets audited by independent folks every once in a while, correct? that it doesn't have gremlins. Is that
Right,
fair?
so every system is monitored and audited differently because they all have different risks. So what we do with our voting system is different than what we do with the statewide voter registration database, which is a closed network, which is different than what we do with our online registration system, right? So they all are monitored and checked in different ways, but they're all monitored and checked.
I just want to shout out that I thought my county, Harford County, did a really good job. So, no, they did. As far as like when you would go to the opening of the ballots, that the attorney would explain what was going on, and then they had a screen, and actually some people that came from other counties thought we had a really good system. So I just wanted to give them credit where credit's due.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for.
Yeah, not a problem. I allowed you to get in 3 or 4 questions, so I think you're good, unless you have some more. Wow. Just one quick question before you get up. The CRIS system, the Campaign Reporting Information System, can you just explain a little bit more about what's going on with that system and the amount of funding that's needed between the different budgets?
So the contract to support the current system, the one that you all use at least once a year, right? That contract expires in 2025. So that's what the new project that Ryan spoke about is us looking to replace that system with a newer, hopefully more user-friendly system, take advantage of some of the new developments in technology databases and technology, because we've had this system for quite a while. None of us can remember exactly what year it is, so I apologize. But this is looking to replace that system, and I don't remember if you said it today or just yesterday, but those 2 projects, the voting system and the new MD Chris, are pending approval as a major IT project would do it. Once that's approved, then all the information will just start flowing, but we're just in the preliminary, the pre-approval stages right now, which is why we just don't have a lot of information, because it just we haven't had that box checked yet.
Right. So there's no real timeline just yet on when.
Well, so we have some money in the budget this year to get somebody on to help us start writing that procurement, right? These are big procurements for us to do, and so we require some outside help for them. So this would just be to get the RFP started, to get that work done, and then it would just, the following year would have a little bit more money because we'd be further along.
And you believe that the amount that you have currently is going to cover the project, or you may need more in the future? Currently, it looks like there's around 540,000.
So yeah, that amount in fiscal year 24 is just to cover personnel to help start with the RFP process development. But in 2025, you'll see more. 2026, you'll see more. So we'll get there.
Got it. I was wondering if we were going to see this again in the future, so it sounds like we will. All right. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Definitely appreciate you all being here. And so that will end the State Board of Elections hearing. We'll now go to the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. And we will begin with the analysis from Madeline Miller.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today I will be presenting the GOCP-YVS analysis. In fiscal 2024, the budget decreases 6.4% to $371.5 million. Nearly 2/3 of the $25.5 million decline can be explained by the removal of 3 general fund deficiencies. The office has 3 main policy areas: criminal justice and law enforcement, children and youth, and victim services. Across these 3 areas, GOCP-YVS serves as an advisor to the governor, a coordinator between the state and local entities, and as a grants administrator. The performance analysis section begins on pages 3 and 4. One of the ways that GOCP-YVS acts as a coordinator is through the creation of the annually requested Youth Out-of-Home Placements Report. This report is created with information from the Department of Human Services, the Developmental Disabilities Administration and Behavioral Health Administration in MDH, and the Maryland State Department of Education. Between fiscal 21 and 22, the number of youth who experienced at least one out-of-home placement fell 2.6% to 6,381. Exhibit 1 on page 5 details the rate of out-of-home placements per 1,000 youth in each jurisdiction. 60.1% of all placements kept youth in their home county, 36.9% were placed somewhere else within the state, and only 3% were placed out of state, a lower rate than was achieved even during the pandemic or earlier in the pandemic. Looking more closely at youth hospitalizations in fiscal 22, there were 676 youth hospitalizations under DHS, including medical and psychiatric stays. This represents a 9% increase compared with fiscal 21, and the report states that there was a significant decrease in youth experiencing a hospital overstay. DLS is asking that the agency comment on how it measures hospital overstays for youth and share how it may have changed in fiscal 22 compared with earlier years in its written testimony. DLS further recommends that the Budget Committees release the funds for the fiscal 2022 report and the adoption of language for the report to be submitted again for fiscal 2023. In its coordinating and grants administering roles, GOCPYVS also operates the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network. This is also called or referred to as MCIN. MCIN was established in 2017 to identify, disrupt, and dismantle violent criminal networks through cross-jurisdictional coordination and data sharing. The number of violent criminal networks disrupted or dismantled by MCIN sites funded by GOCPYVS is shown in Exhibit 2. In fiscal 22, 631 networks were disrupted or dismantled at an all-time high and a 79.8% increase compared to fiscal 21. I'll now begin my discussion of the agency's budget. The working appropriation includes $4.9 million in CARES funding and over $530,000 in ARPA funds. CARES Act funding is used for the Edward Bryan Memorial Justice Assistant Program, and ARPA funds are used for Family Violence Prevention and Services grants. The agency also receives $8 million across 4 grants from the Dedicated Purpose Account, which was provided through Supplemental Budget number 5 of 2022. Additionally, the agency receives 3 general fund deficiency appropriations to replace mistakenly reverted funds from fiscal 2022 closeout. Those deficiencies include $13.2 million in local law enforcement grant funding, $3.3 million for BCCPI grant funding, and $416,000 for VSU grant funding. The deficiencies will be discussed further in the issues section of the analysis. Exhibit 3 on page 9 provides an overview of agency spending, most of which goes to grant programs. The administrative headquarters accounts for 34% of the total allowance, and approximately 51% of the GOCPYVS allowance is appropriated for various local law enforcement grants, including the annual allocation of the formula-based SAP fund and the SAP enhancement. The remaining 15% of the allowance supports the Children's Services Unit, the Victim Services Unit, MCIN, BCCPI, VIP, and the Maryland Statistical Analysis Center. Exhibit 4 on pages 11 and 12 provides explanations for how the budget changes from fiscal 23 to 24. Decreases are driven primarily by what I mentioned previously, the removal of fiscal 23 deficiencies, the removal of grants funded from the Dedicated Purpose Account, and the removal of pandemic-related federal stimulus funds. The decreases are partially offset by the addition of the addition of 2 new positions for the Maryland Behavioral Health and Public Safety Center of Excellence. This center was established by Chapters 68 and 69 of 2021 and Chapter 350 of 2022. More information about the center can be found in the discussion after this exhibit, but there are also grant funds associated with the center to the tune of $500,000. That's described on page 12, or one of the lines on page 12. As Exhibit 4 demonstrates, budget changes are driven by grant programming. Additional detail about the changes to state grants and federal grants can be found in Appendix 4 and Appendix 5. One way in which grant funding remains consistent, however, is through the continuation of fiscal 23 enhanced public safety funding. Exhibit 5 details the elements of the enhanced public safety funding initiative relevant to GOCPYVS. Note that the $45.9 million enhancement to the state aid for police protection program is continued. SAP funds provide support to local and county police agency operations. There's a statutory portion as well as that is consistent in its application from year to year, as well as the enhancement. Funding under the original formula decreases in fiscal 24 by a little over $462,000. But the enhancement portion is applied exactly as it was in fiscal 23, as shown in Exhibit 6 on page 14. Previously, the legislature elected to allocate the SAP enhancement based upon rates of violent crime in jurisdictions. So that change, or that formula or that process relies upon data published in calendar 2020. To continue allocating funding to target jurisdictions facing high incidence of violent crime, DLS recommends adding budget language allocating the fiscal 2024 SAP enhancement funds based on violent crime data found in Maryland's 2021 UCR. That publication has not yet occurred, but is expected in mid-March. The Where It Goes chart also does not reflect a change in funding for the warrant apprehension grant funding. $3.25 million was provided by supplemental budget number 3 of 2022 for fiscal 22 and for fiscal 23. Though the supplemental was for those 2 years, the allowance suggests that funding is provided in fiscal 23 and fiscal 24 instead. The analysis includes some discussion of how the funds have been used already, but GOCPYVS should additionally comment on the use of funds in each fiscal year and the progress that has been made towards the initiative in its written testimony. Personnel data is shown on page 16. This is an agency with a high turnover rate, even though there are only about 100 positions. As of December 31st, 2022, there were 11 vacant positions in GOCPYVS, and its vacancy rate is 10.6 percentage points above the budgeted turnover. 8 of the vacant positions have been vacant for less than a year. The issues portion of the analysis begins on page 17 with a discussion of the agency's grant oversight. Approximately 97% of the agency's budget is for grants in the allowance, and GOCPYVS oversees $359.2 million in grants across all fund types. So this is something which is critically important to the operations of the agency. In the fiscal 22 and 23 MFR submissions, GOCPYVS was not able to report some grants management measures as it had previously. The fiscal 22 JCR restricted $125,000 for GOCPYVS to return to reporting that MFR. And except for the percentage of unused state funds returned in fiscal 22, GOCPYVS reported that information as requested, and DLS is therefore recommending the release of funds. Exhibit 7 on page 18 shows some of those measures. It shows the percentage of grants in compliance, the percentage of grants with above average compliance, and the number of grant audits completed between fiscal 2018 and 2022. Between fiscal 18 and 2022, the number of audits dropped from 34 to 12. During fiscal 2020, the number fell significantly further to just 6 grants completed, which GOCPYVS attributes to the pandemic. This, however, does not explain the decline prior to the pandemic, and position vacancies and turnover within the agency may explain some of the decline. Returning to the mistakenly reverted grant funds in fiscal 22 closeout, some of these funds were accidentally reverted due to their status as non-lapsing special funds. GOCPYVS reports that it has created a strategy for dealing with this particular fund type in fiscal 23 closeout. However, it cannot explain why special funds and federal funds were canceled during closeout, as individuals responsible for managing that are no longer with the agency. This is not the first time that there have been significant grant funds reverted from GOCPYVS. In response to the agency reporting $17.2 million in general fund reversions in fiscal 2020, language in the 2021 JCR restricted funds within the agency's budget to be used for contracting with a private accounting firm to perform a fiscal audit. Language also required that the agency submit a report with the audit's findings and any corrective actions by December 31st, 2021. That report's deadline has been extended 3 times now until the end of fiscal 2022. The office put out a task order request for proposal in May of 2022 with a June 16th due date. However, a vendor was not selected until October 28th. The agency now reports that it's contracted with the vendor to perform the audit, and the audit is currently underway. Its final costs are only about $49,000, and it, like I said previously, is expected to be finished by the end of the year, or the fiscal year. To ensure that the budget committees receive the results of the audit, DLS is recommending restricting funds pending the submission of a report by July 1st. The second issue of my analysis relates to VOCA. VOCA is a program which seeks to provide victims of crime with assistance and services to support their restoration following a violent crime and to help them navigate the criminal justice process. For this particular grant program, GOCPYVS in the state of Maryland received 3-year federal awards, which are shown in Exhibit 8 on page 20. Federal VOCA funds have decreased significantly from fiscal 2018 when the federal government chose to spend down a large amount of funds that it had accumulated over time. The federal fiscal 23 award is expected to be published, or is expected to be published in September 2023, and GOCPYVS reports it's expected to be between the previous 2 awards, so somewhere between $18.9 million and $26.3 million. In recognition that the federal awards to states have declined in recent years, U.S. Congress passed VOCA Fix to sustain the Crime Victims Fund Act of 2021. The VOCA Fix authorized no-cost extensions to previously closed federal funding cycles, but it is not expected to increase the overall federal awards for a few years yet. VOCA of Crime Act expenditures are shown in Exhibit 9 on page 21. To better support victims of crime in Maryland and to take advantage of the federal support, legislative appropriations and actual spending for the VOCA program have increased over time. During the 2022 sessions, concerns with an anticipated decline in federal funding resulted in the addition of budget language to prioritize non-state victim services providers eligible to receive funding. The language also required VOCA funding to be awarded to individual service providers at a level equal to that of fiscal 2021. This represents the 5th year of continuation funding that non-state victim services providers have been eligible for. Additionally, that JCR required the office to submit 2 reports and a letter, which these reports restricted $1.5 million in general funds from the office's budget, and GOCPYVS has submitted these reports, and DLS recommends the release of the associated withheld funds. Prior to continuation funding efforts, spreading out the use of the federal award across multiple years allowed GOCPYVS to carry a balance for VOCA. This also allowed GOCPYVS to fulfill awards at a higher level of actual spending than it had in the past, and to smooth the effects of decreased federal awards over time. This is shown in Exhibit 10, which is the actual spending compared with federal awards through fiscal 2021. Actual spending reached $52.5 million in fiscal 2022. However, the VOCA balance and federal award were not enough to achieve continuation funding, and the federal award was supplemented with ARPA funding. In recognition of a gap that existed between the amount of federal funds and the amount of funding needed to sustain continuation funding for a 5th year, $35 million in general fund support were added through supplemental budget number 3 last year, and that general fund support is continued in fiscal 2024 illustrated in Exhibit 11 on page 24. In fiscal 22, the agency had to use a fund balance to meet the actual level of spending necessitated by continuation funding. And in fiscal 23, it is estimated that the agency will have enough money between general and federal funds to meet the fifth year continuation funding requirements. If awards do not increase beyond that level, then there should also be enough general and federal fund support for fiscal 2024. Moving forward, however, federal funding is unlikely to meet the program's current expenditure levels for non-state victim service providers or allow for the program's reserve to be rebuilt. DLS is asking that the agency comment on the amount of unobligated funding that it expects to have in reserves for use in future fiscal years, and assuming that the legislative appropriations are met in fiscal 23 and in 24. Finally, the last portion of this VOCA issue is that continuation funding and outcomes for victims are something through which that the legislature should consider. In recent years, the use of continuation funding has meant the pool of potential recipients has decreased to only those who were eligible for funding in the previous years. GOCPYVS reported in one of its reports from the interim that there were numerous unallowable items in funding applications from the eligible non-state victim service providers, and this did not and this is the information that the victim services providers gave in their grant applications was not adequate for the agency to follow its federal guidelines in awarding funds. To resolve the issues, the agency provided technical assistance and allowed applicants to resubmit their applications. As the state's VOCA program has expanded its annual funding over time, it's increasingly important that the budget committees understand how VOCA spending benefits Marylanders. In the same 2022 report, GOCPYVS reported that non-state victim services providers served over 85,000 victims in Maryland in federal fiscal 2022, over half of which were new to receiving support. As VOCA funding and expenditures remain of great importance, DLS recommends adding budget language restricting funds pending the submission of 2 reports and a letter on the program's proposed awards, actual expenditures, available funding, as well as the program outcomes. The next section of the analysis document goes over the recommended actions, which I have discussed previously, and I'm able to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Are there any questions for the analysts? All right, seeing none, thank you for your thorough analysis. We will now turn to the Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services and bring up Acting Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer, Veronica Mullis. I don't know if you had any others that you wanted to bring up. If not, that's totally fine. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bridges, Vice Chair Ivy, and the rest of the committee. And thank you, Madeline, for doing such a wonderful, detailed analysis of our budget. My name is Veronica Mullis. I am the current CFO for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, and interim acting executive director to keep the doors open. You have our response to the analysis. We concur with it, and if there are any other questions, I'm open at this time.
Thank you very much. I do have a question, and just in terms of the VOCA funding, and I'm looking at the answer, can you explain a little bit more, just for folks, how you do the funding in terms of waiting for the federal funds to kick in and, the allocation with the general funds, how that works?
So currently, the process is that we get the funding, we get the appropriation at the beginning of the year. The concern is that we don't get the award until September. We don't know what the funding's going to be. So we can't put out the awards because we don't know what the amounts are. We are looking to convert that process such that we, are using what we know is available now. We're going to let those awards go the 1st of July this year, And then we'll know in '25 exactly how much money we have, because we'll get the award letter this September, but we won't spend it till next July. And then we'll have a better number of what general funds we need and what actual VOCA funds we will have. Plus, we'll get to the point that we'll know what closeout is, and then if there's any funds not spent by subrecipients, they then become available also.
Got it. And so with the question that the analyst asked about future funding, how do you handle that? Just thinking about federal government and what they're able or not able to do in the future.
I'm not sure I understand the question. When you speak to future funding, this should help us know better what future funding we will have annually. This will, actually, we'll have numbers that we can, right now we have limited data that we can't even begin to try to guess how much funding is going to be there. And converting over to this process here, we will know how much funding is available.
Got it. I see what you're saying. Any other questions? Oh, Delegate McComas.
I guess what I'm kind of wondering is if you don't know what your funding is, okay, until way, the victims are still out there, right?
But we're not denying them funding.
But, okay, so you're basically caught a bridge until you get the funds from the feds? In other words, we're loaning.
What we've been doing is delaying giving them the funding until we know what it is. We have the appropriation on our books, but we just don't know what the federal funds are going to be. We don't know, and there's been a big swing in how much federal funding is available for VOCA. Hence, we've got the $35 million, surplus, or not surplus, but addition to that to help us out. But they still get their money. This process is going to change how soon they get their money. They'll get it earlier in the year than they have been getting. And we're hoping once we convert over that, moving forward, they will always receive their funding on July 1.
So in other words, you're still servicing the folks that need servicing.
Yes.
It's just you don't know for sure you're going to get the federal money in September or whenever.
Or how much we're going to get.
Or how much.
Right. So, and we've not been able to get the awards out earlier. This will allow us to get the awards out earlier because we will have a known amount to do that with.
So the one who is mainly impacted is your staff, you and your staff.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. But it will give us and help us, be more transparent and give you more accurate data.
Thanks. So just along the lines of what Delegate McComas was asking, so you'll have information about how much you'll get, but you won't actually have the funding yet. They'll tell you how much, but you won't get the funding immediately. Is that what you're saying?
In any fiscal year under the current process, we are looking forward to how much funding we may get.
Right.
Okay, and in our explanation, we're hoping that in 24 to move that process over to using what we know we have available now.
Right.
Plus the $35 million. In that interim period, we will get our 23 VOCA award. We will not use that part of that award until the beginning of 25, and we will know at that point what that award is. If we wait in 24 till we get the 23 award, we had to wait till October because we don't know what it is. So we put them out, and they get the money, but this will help us move to a state fiscal year and help us know what our numbers are going to be moving forward.
All right. Any other questions? Don't think you have any other questions right now.
Thank you.
There may be some questions that we ask after this.
Yes, if there's follow-up, we will be happy to get back with the committee.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for being here. I understand with the agency, it's going through some changes,
When
And
they
so,
say turnover's there, turnover
Right.
is there.
definitely there. Hopefully, pretty soon we'll have not an acting executive director, we'll have an executive director.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate McCombs.
Wanted to ask one question. Do you think our federal delegation in Congress could help resolve this? We have 2 senators. We've got
It's not
8.
a matter of getting it resolved. When we do this, it's a matter of, we put the so to speak, the cart before the horse, and when we let these grants. If we make this changeover that we're suggesting, we'll put the horse before the cart. But
Okay.
right now, it's just not, it's the process that's the problem, not the funding. It's the process of how we're implementing. When we change over, that process will.
Are you guaranteed that they're going to change it over? Because it's the federals controlling it, right?
But that's not, yes, that process won't change. They'll continue to award grants as they always have. It's how the agency manages those awards in-house that matters. If we are giving out money in any fiscal year for which we don't know how much the award is going to be, it makes it difficult to come up with a dollar amount to give out an award. We can't give out money we don't know we have. When we convert this in this fiscal year, and we're already starting to work with, getting, to my knowledge, the solicitations out for the VOCA, we'll have it July 1. And then we won't use our FY23 VOCA award until we start 25. We will know how much we get in VOCA this coming September. So we'll be able to know that and use that in 25 as an actual amount.
Okay. All right.
That,
Thank you.
I'm trying. It's a complicated issue. It's more about how the finances in the agency is managed and works versus, how much, it's also how much money we're going to get. But if you don't know that ahead of time, you're guessing. And we're moving that so that we do know that and can report better.
All right, any more questions? If not, thank you so very much for being here and holding things together in the interim.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. We do have some public comment as well. And just a reminder for public testimony, you all get 2 minutes. The first individual we'll have speak is Kim Eisenreich from Howard County Office of the Local Children's Board. Oh, you're coming up as a panel?
We are, if
That
that's
is
okay.
that is perfect.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Just make sure you introduce yourself before you speak.
Good afternoon, delegates. I'm delighted to be here to speak on behalf of local management boards. My name is Pam Brown, and I'm with the Anne Arundel County Local Management Board. We are currently under GOCPYVS and under their budget, but we hope that that is going to change. Local management boards are part of a system in Maryland that was created 30 years ago in recognition that children and families who are vulnerable really need a group that overlooks them in a very holistic way. At that time, Maryland created a children's cabinet, which still exists with all the secretaries of human services, the Governor's Office for Children, which was the technical arm of the cabinet, and then local management boards, one in every jurisdiction in the state. And the reason there are local management boards is to ensure that when state government and the governor set results that they want for children, that at the local level, we translate those results, we do assessments, we look for needs, and then we fund gaps in services. We were particularly effective during the pandemic because we're small but mighty, and we're very nimble, and we can move on a dime. And I think many of you know the work we did during the pandemic to ensure that vulnerable families were fed, had transportation, got their COVIDs, got Chromebooks. We did all that. So we're really here today to say 2 things. First of all, we used to be funded at 53 million, and that was almost 12 years ago. Every year that funding has decreased. GOCPYCF has recommended flat funding. Again, this year, that was after the legislature gave us a 1.5 million increase last year. That increase was not included in the request made by GOCPYCF. So we're here, we are going to be talking to legislators about an increase in our budget. We're also talking to legislators about the importance of the Governor's Office for Children. Really, nationally, people look to Maryland for the work around the Children's Cabinet, the Governor's Office for Children, and local management boards at the local level. And so we are working hard to ensure that Governor's Office for Children is pulled back out of GOCPCYF. We don't like the thought of children being criminalized. Reset up. Thank you. And over to Kim.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Kim Eisenreich. I'm the administrator of the Howard County Local Management Board and chair of the Maryland Association of Local Management Boards. And across Maryland, we continue to see an increase in child poverty rates, as well as our ALICE population, which are those that are asset limited, income constrained, and employed. In Howard County, those who cannot access affordable childcare, after school and summer programming, as well as quality mental health services, just to name a few, that gap is continuing to grow. With additional funding, we'd be better positioned to address these gaps across the state of Maryland, and more importantly, build wraparound services and sustainable pathways for children, youth, and families to increase economic mobility. Local management boards have a huge mission to undertake, which is to meet the needs of Maryland's most vulnerable children, youth, and families during a time when those needs and gaps in services are only growing. Whether it's addressing food insecurity, like in Talbot and Caroline counties, providing social and emotional supports through after-school and summer and mentoring programs like in Montgomery County, Queen Anne's, and my own jurisdiction in Howard, providing home visiting support to first-time mothers in Garrett County, or building the capacity of our local nonprofits to share in the work, like in Wacomico County, we know two things. $20 million across 24 jurisdictions is simply not enough, and we can't do it alone. So we do request your support of a $10 million increase to the Children's Cabinet Interagency Fund to support the work of local management boards. Thank you so much for your consideration and your time.
Hi, my name is Rosie Ramsey Granillo. I'm the director of the Local Management Board in Kent County, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. As one of the smallest jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, we receive about 2% of the Local Management Board budget. We're able to do a lot of different things with that, but it is constrained. We can't really fund programs at a robust level. We have to prioritize very selectively what we can support. And we feel that with an increase in our budget, we could really be the backbone of support that a lot of our organizations, our partners, deserve. For example, we work closely with Mineri's Dream Alliance, a new local nonprofit in our community. We're so excited for them. Last night they celebrated their first one-year anniversary. But you know, they are starting out. They are serving 5 or 6 counties. They have 11 projects or grants that they are implementing, but they only have 15 staff members. They have grants that restrict the amount of snacks they can buy. Like, if you're serving teens, you need a lot of snacks. So we want to be that backbone. We want to really fund them at a robust level and make sure that we are able to serve every kid in our community without such tight constraints. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here and the work that you do as well. It is definitely appreciated. You know, Delegate Acevedo has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to echo your comments about the work you all are doing, and no doubt will continue to do. I just have a question based on you all's testimony. You mentioned, one, you all are here requesting an increase of $10 million, and I'm curious as to, because you're talking about the work that you all do and the increase that's needed, has local management board seen a cut in funding, let's just say a decade ago compared to today? How much were local management boards getting compared to what you're requesting today?
So we were getting $53 million in 2009. The recession cut that, but then the cuts continued, and so we are now at $20 million. So $53 million in 2009, $20 million in 2023.
And you all are requesting $10 million? $10
million to get us at least up to $30 million.
Right. I'll get you over half. There's nowhere where you used to be in terms of funding.
No.
Gotcha. And then my next question is, you know, with this increased funds that you all are requesting, and I know you all have limited amount of time with your testimony, can you speak to what as far as like intentions, what, I work with my local management board in Montgomery County, the Collaboration Council. I could obviously speak to the wonderful work that they're doing. You all represent your respective jurisdictions. Can you all speak to just what some of the work you all will be doing with this additional funding that you all are requesting?
Who wants to start? So in Anne Arundel County, we really want to focus on homeless families. It's an increase across the state, but in Anne Arundel County, we also have no affordable housing and an increase in everything for families, and they're really struggling. So we would be using money around that population. We have some other money, but we need some matches. So one of the things that local management boards are very clever about is we figure out how to use state funding and then match it. So most of our dollars we get from the state are matched at least 3 times, and in some of our jurisdictions 5 times. But that's where we are focused at this present time locally. And Kim?
Yeah, so for us, one of our big focuses would be closing the access gap to social emotional learning. In Howard County, it's about $300 to $500 a week for after school or summer programming, which over 25% of our population cannot afford. So we have a few programs now that are free to our residents who can't afford those programs to bridge those gaps and to provide that social emotional learning and academic support. But it's only a few across K to 12. And so we would definitely be able to invest much more deeply in that and also build pathways. We do some workforce work with older youth, but it's really just a program. What is beyond that? And we really want to start looking at building pathways for economic mobility for youth that don't have access to college, to apprenticeships, to work, and really leverage the assets of Howard in terms of our businesses to really start to create some legitimate pathways for them after high school and after our summer program.
And in Kent, we have about 30 high schoolers right now that are designing their own mental health intervention, or what kind of programming they want to see next year to improve mental health well-being amongst their peers, and it would be a youth-led project. I have a little bit of funding allocated for that, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to need more. So that is something I would like to robustly fund.
Yeah, appreciate all that, and appreciate you mentioning Minories Dream Alliance. Happen to know some really good people over there doing great work in Kent County. So thank you all so very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. I don't want to date myself, but I do remember a time when the Governor's Office of Children was separate from GOCAP, and now we have the name that it is now. When did that change actually happen?
So it started 7 years ago, and it was completed about 5 years ago, very quietly. The shift just suddenly happened, and it was part of the big coordinating thing of the Hogan administration. I think it was probably done to save dollars, but the unintended consequences are huge.
Yeah. And so there is no more children's cabinet?
There is a children's cabinet.
There is a children's cabinet.
And that is really just a group of all the different secretaries for Health and Human Services, so the health officer and the state superintendent, they all meet together. They set results based on where the governor's priorities are. The Governor's Office for Children then makes sure those results are implemented with a local flavor across the state. So it really is a beautiful model, and it was a terrible thing that it got disrupted in the way it did. And I think it was quite unintended. I think it was done with misunderstanding, but it's done now, and we have to correct it.
Yeah. And you've been reaching out to the current administration about this, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yep, just wanted to make sure.
We have.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate McCombs.
Change anything. How are the counties, how do they figure out what their allotment is from this agency? Is it based on population, or how do you divvy up the money?
So years ago, we created a formula that is based on population poverty and about 7 different weighted pieces that around vulnerable children and families. And then the money we get is then divided through that formula. Now, the formula has been tweaked a bit over the years to the extent that we had this whole working group to try and create a new formula. And everybody basically gave up and said, this is probably as fair as we're going to get. But we tested out all of the demographics around it, and that's what we have.
Is it possible you could send us a copy of what the revised vision is? The current vision.
I will try to make it very simple.
Okay, just because I'm new to appropriations and
okay, so
Yes, well, I will send you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. She's loving being over here now from being on judiciary, so.
Oh, yeah, much better. Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very
we
much.
appreciate you being here. The next person I'm calling up, and if you do have a panel, please be sure to bring your panel up. I have Tanya Aria from Turnaround Inc. And of course, if I mess anything up, especially with your name, please correct me.
Mr. Chairman, it's Tanya Araya, but it's always Flub, so no worries. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Again, my name is Tanya Araya. I am the Director of Programs at Turnaround Inc., a 44-year-old rape crisis program that operates in Baltimore City and in Baltimore County. In addition to sexual assault services, we are also a comprehensive intimate partner violence and human trafficking service provider in both counties as well as in Howard County. Turnaround is just one of many rape crisis centers around the state. Most provide a comprehensive list of services, including a 24-hour helpline, therapy, case management, legal advocacy services, and shelter. And they are typically, as in our agency, free to any survivor who is seeking safety, emotional support, or justice. This work, however, cannot continue without the support and continued funding from the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. The demand for our services grew significantly during the pandemic and has yet to return to pre-pandemic figures. Last fiscal year, our staff fielded more than 13,000 calls and served more than 4,000 individuals, providing case management services, shelter, and legal advocacy. Among these 4,000 individuals was the college student who called our helpline after being sexually assaulted, too afraid to talk to her parents, too afraid to talk to police or seek a forensic exam, and instead contemplated suicide. A scared 7-year-old boy who mustered the courage to tell a trusted adult at school about the sexual abuse he was experiencing at home, and a 14-year-old girl who ran away from her 4th foster home and found herself lured into being trafficked by a 23-year-old man she believed to be her boyfriend. It's these individuals who deserve our full commitment. Today, I implore you to consider the challenge victim service providers face when critically important funding isn't sufficient. Year after year, our ability to recruit and retain skilled, experienced, and passionate staff is compromised, and we know that rape crisis centers deserve better. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and all the work that you do with Turnaround Inc. Delegate Acevedo, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Ivy here. Thank you so much for the work that you've done with Turnaround specifically. A dear friend of mine actually worked there for several years, and I just know, we just got some of the top line, highlights about what you all actually do on a daily basis, and I just wanted to use my voice to commend you for the work that you've been doing.
Thank you so much,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Ivy. My apologies. I'm giving somebody else your title. Are there any other questions? If not, thank you once again for being here and your testimony and all the work that you do as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next individual we'll bring up is Inga James from Hartley House, Inc. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here to talk to all of you about the needs of victims in our state, in our communities. I'm the president and executive director of Hartley House, which serves Frederick County for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and child abuse. And our numbers since COVID have risen astronomically. We have a population of about 270,000 people in Frederick County. Our calls to the hotline since 2019, pre-COVID, went up 72%. Our budget didn't go up 72%. The number of clients that we served from 2019 to 2022 went up 65%. Neither did our budget. We have seen not only the incredible increase in violence in our communities, family violence primarily, we have also seen an enormous increase in the severity. What I always tell people is that COVID screwed with us all, but families bore the brunt. Because the violence, the severity, the amount of broken bones and burns and weapons and dragging and all kinds of things that are happening are like nothing we've ever seen in our 45-year history. In 2022, we had the most bed nights of our shelter in history because so many women and families were fleeing. We also served more than 22,000 people in our community, not served, wrong word, sorry, touched, because we have a huge prevention department as well. We also know that in our county, Frederick County, as well as the state of Maryland, child sex abuse cases reports to CPS and law enforcement dropped 70% in the first year of COVID. They're going up now. The reason that they dropped is because kids weren't going to school, they weren't playing games, they weren't out with coaches or pastors or doctors. Nobody was reporting this abuse. But now they're back in school, they're playing their baseball games again, and they're being reported. Our police chief had to take men off of his street crimes unit into the child sex abuse unit because they didn't have enough people to deal with all these. These are the kind of victim services that are necessary in our communities. The issues of COVID and of the sex abuse pandemic that happened during COVID is going to haunt us for 10, 15, 20 years. Experts are already telling us. We need as much money to serve these families as possible because there's no other place for them to go. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the work that you're doing. Just a quick question. How many people do you actually have on staff?
55.
55. They're doing a lot of work, for the amount of increases that you just talked about.
Yes, sir.
Definitely want to say thank you for all the work that you all are doing.
Thank you.
Any questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe we also have your written testimony as well. The next person I'll bring up is Melanie Shapiro from Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Melanie Shapiro. I'm the Public Policy Director with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. We are the federally recognized state domestic violence coalition. We represent the 19 comprehensive programs as well as allied organizations, individuals, and professionals. Organizations like Hartley House, and I'd like to thank our representatives who are here today to tell you what they are seeing on the ground. Unfortunately, what Ms. James shared with you is what we are hearing from every single program around the state. The numbers look different, but what is absolutely consistent from every single program is that the numbers are up, the severity of the violence is up, and in two particular measures we're seeing that. In the hotline calls, so one program said 92% increase in domestic violence calls for service in FY22, with a 74% increase in time spent per call. So not just the number of calls, but the amount of units of service that are needed continue to be up. And so somebody before might just come in for counseling. Now they're coming in and they need counseling, and they need housing, and they might need job assistance and childcare. And so the needs are continuing to increase. And as we heard from the analysis, the federal funding landscape continues to be quite precarious. And what we are hearing is that consistent is that we're going to get more VOCA dollars than last year, but less than last year, more than the year before. So 1.9 billion is what is coming down to be divided amongst all of the states. And while we are attempting to address the VOCA, what we are not doing is specifically addressing the funding needs for domestic violence programming. I went back, GOCAP has placed, the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, placed on their website reports back to 2014. And if you look at the 2014 report, through the DOMV grant, which is how the money is administered, a little over $2 million. 2015, a little over $2 million. I can go on, but in this year, in the budget, is a little over $2 million. And while I'd like to thank the General Assembly for the work that they did last year, because this is actually this year a budget cut, because last year there was the Domestic Violence Centers grant. And what was told to us is that there were 38 grant applicants for $3 million. 38. And so that's demonstrative of the overwhelming need for additional funding and additional services. The unmet needs, so there's our national network does a data count, so it's a one-day snapshot of what the domestic violence numbers are in the state. Last year, there were an average of 13 hotline calls per hour. There were 191 victims that had unmet requests for service, not because the programs didn't want to provide service to them, but because they absolutely didn't have the physical capacity to do that. And a third of those were for housing and emergency shelter. And so we are asking, respectfully, that the DOMV grant dollars be increased from the $2,089,000 to a total of $5 million. That supports the comprehensive domestic violence programs. We're asking to reinstate the Domestic Violence Centers grant, which is an open grant for all domestic violence programming, and that be increased from the $3 million that was last year to a total of $5 million. And I think that that is the first step in attempting to meet the real needs in Maryland of victims of domestic violence.
Thank you very much. You also submitted a written testimony as well,
I did.
Correct? Okay,
yes.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank you again for all the work that you do and the network, all the work that you're doing across the state as well. Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Jordan with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. It's a pleasure to be here and escape the Judiciary Committee, as always. You've already heard from our member programs, and I don't want to repeat what has already been said, but I did want to just turn the lens on a couple of other things. First, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for the budget language that you all have included in the budget in the past. I completely believe that without your intervention, we would have had a worse problem on our hands. It's because of the General Assembly that we were able to keep victim services so stable. You've heard about increased demand, increased complexity and dangerousness. Specialized skills are needed to respond to that. You've also should hear and think about, in our context, the workforce issues. I know that you've heard about workforce issues. I know that you know them. You live in this state as well. But we cannot keep staff because we are not paying them enough. And this is part of why the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault fully supports the network's request for additional funding for domestic violence funding. We support the Child Advocacy Center's request for more services for survivors of child sexual abuse, and MCASA is also asking for an additional $5 million for sexual assault programs, which is all in our written testimony. But let me read you some of the experiences. With some of the wages that we were able to offer our new employees, they can go to any fast food restaurant in our county and make the same, if not more. We recently had 2 advocate positions open for nearly 8 months because our advocate's salary is not competitive and is less than some local retail and hospitality positions, which don't require shift work or special skills in human services. We're not able to compensate counselors at a rate that allows them to pay for their schooling and licensure, yet we're required to have schooling and licensure for those positions. I think that everyone on this committee understands the needs of survivors, the needs of kids and people who are raped and sexually assaulted. But I also just ask you to remember that rape crisis centers are small businesses. We have to make payroll. We have to retain staff if we want to help survivors. The last thing I'll say is that on Monday, the CDC released a report about the experience of youth in America. It has amazing information in it. Some of the shocking things that it reveals is that 18% of high school girls have been sexually assaulted. 20% of kids in high school who are GBLTQ plus have been sexually assaulted. 14% have been raped. We can do better. You can do better. Maryland can do better, but we have to have more money to be able to do that.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you for being here and all the work that you're doing as well. Definitely appreciate it. Any questions? Thank you. The next person we'll hear from is Wendy Myers from the Maryland Children's Alliance. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bridges and members of the subcommittee. I'm Wendy Myers, and I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Children's Alliance, or MCA. MCA is the statewide chapter which serves as the convener for Maryland's 24 Child Advocacy Centers, or CACs. CACs serve child victims of physical and sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. CACs are currently allocated $300,000 in state funds within the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, which translates to only $12,500 per CAC in the state. State funding has remained flat since fiscal year 17, despite increases in costs to provide services as well as an increase in demand for services, as you've repeatedly heard today already. Therefore, on behalf of Maryland's 24 CACs, I'm respectfully requesting an increase in this funding to $1.3 million annually. To give you a sense of the amount of children served, in the 5-year period between 2016 and 2021, Maryland CACs provided services to 31,955 children. In 2021, Maryland CACs served 5,474 children. And during the first half of 2022, Maryland CACs served 3,101 children, reflecting a steady increase in the demand for services. Using the 2021 data, the state of Maryland funds CACs at $54.80 per child victim served. Other states, such as New Jersey, fund CACs at over $1,700 per child. Delaware funds their CACs at $620 per child. West Virginia funds $536 per child, and Virginia funds $179 per child. The U.S. national average, according to the National Children's Alliance, is $269 per child. Our model is critical to serve child victims as it utilizes the multidisciplinary team response to child abuse. All the professionals come together in order to provide the best outcomes for children and for communities. Each CAC team includes specially trained forensic interviewers, law enforcement, child protective services, family advocates, prosecutors, medical providers, and mental health therapists. This approach streamlines coordination of interagency services, increases successful prosecution of perpetrators, and minimizes the trauma through therapeutic interventions. Increased state funding will mean that CACs can adequately staff and provide much-needed services. It means a part-time therapist could be made full-time, thus reducing wait times for services. This small increase in funding will have grand implications for the work we do. According to a study by the University of Maryland in 2021, for every dollar spent on CAC services, the state would save $663 on other services. When the state supports its child advocacy centers, it is not only benefiting economically, but also ensuring and restoring health and safety for all of its children. MCA and the network of Maryland CACs are grateful for the current financial support of $300,000 annually since 2017. However, given the rise in demand for services, we respectfully request an increase, bringing the total annual state investment to child advocacy centers to $1.3 million. On behalf of our 24 local child advocacy centers, our network of multidisciplinary teams, and the children and families we serve, thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much for being here. Looks like Vice Chair Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much, Wendy, for the work that you've been doing. Something just kind of caught my ear as you were speaking. You said you're currently receiving $300,000 a year in funding.
That's correct.
And you have 24 centers that you all work
24 centers in total, yes, that's
with? Okay,
correct.
so you're asking for a total of $1.3 million to do some really great work. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Delegate McCombs.
I just have a quick question. Is it fair to say that, at least in our Child Advocacy Center that I'm familiar with, they get professionals from the police department, they get the social services, and they work as a team. So I'm assuming, I don't know, that those salaries are paid for by the Sheriff's Department or the Department of Social Services. So is that pretty much the way it's handled in your 24 jurisdictions?
In the 24 jurisdictions, the partnerships are comprised of Child Advocacy Center staff that is separate from those state and county employees. But the state and county employees are housed at those centers and provide investigative support, sometimes case oversight, and so forth.
Because, I mean, I was just wondering if maybe the New Jersey that you quoted, which is the 17,000, I was wondering if they're paying for
1,700.
Oh, it was 1,700, was it? 17,000, okay, all right.
Per child?
Yeah,
Yes,
just
that's correct.
delete what I was going to say, all
That's
right.
okay, not to correct
Thank
you, I
Mr.
just
Chair.
wanted to make sure.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for being here and for all the work that you do as well. We now will have Nikki Thrash from Hartley House. No Nikki Thrash. I don't believe we have anyone else scheduled to speak. No Nikki Thrash, going once, twice, 3 times. Well, I want to thank Nikki Thrash and Hartley House for the great work that they do, and all of the individuals who provided testimony. We really appreciate you being here as well, and for all the work that you're doing in the communities across the state. And so with that, that will end the hearing for Public Safety and Administration for today. Thank you all very much.